All right.
Oh, here we go. Awesome.
Hello, everyone. Looks like no one's actually in here yet, so we will wait a minute. Oh, here we go. We got some people now. If you hear some strange breathing, that is not me. I'm okay. I have an old dog here with me tonight.
Aww.
He's our little guest, so if you hear strange breathing, we're good.
I'm sure that we will. Can you show him?
Not really with myself.
Not really.
Right now,
okay. What's his name?
His name is Tyler, interestingly.
I love human names for animals.
I thought that was a funny one.
That's amazing.
All right. Well, definitely we are here for question and answer. So if you guys have questions related to OCD, please send them in and we will start answering some questions. In the meantime, we can introduce ourselves. We've been here for a few weeks now, but my name is Maia and this is Allie. We are the co-founders of Quirk. We are a nonprofit organization that is here for OCD advocacy and support. We offer free support groups, and one of our goals is to stay very accessible because we understand the difficulties in accessing adequate OCD treatment. Allie, anything else that you want to add briefly?
No, I mean, that was amazing. You covered it all in like a very small amount of time, which is truly a talent at this point. But yeah, like Maya said, my name's Allie. I'm the other co-founder. We are, working a lot with people trying to, as Maya kind of highlighted, keep it super accessible for everyone. We want especially to be able to emphasize like the creativity of the community. We get really excited by being able to empower artists in the community, being able to empower other people to do their own form of advocacy and things like that. We are absolutely in no way therapists. We have our own kind of lived experience with OCD, but sort of navigating that has been a learning experience in itself. And we love to kind of highlight that or emphasize that for people too. We'll talk at some point throughout the session about like all of the things that we're doing and working on and passionate about. But for now, I know we're getting some questions coming in. So I don't know, Maya, do you want to pick the first one?
Yeah, let's go for it. So Alyssa Marie here has a question. How can I tell the difference between existential OCD, believing the world isn't real, and actual delusions? Interesting question. So for those who don't understand existential OCD or that term is new to you, existential OCD refers to obsessions that center around existential themes like, are we living in a simulation? What is real and what is not real? What's going to happen when we die? Those sorts of very scary and relatable obsessions. But with OCD, of course, they are taken to a higher degree where individuals get very stuck on these thoughts and are unable to kind of move on because of them. So telling the difference between existential OCD and actual delusions. Allie, what are your thoughts first of all?
Well, okay, so my initial thought is okay, this already feels like it could be a stuck place because right off the bat, I'm okay, I don't want us to spend too much time wondering what's a delusion and what's based in OCD, just because I think that itself could become ritualistic and or kind of seeking reassurance to identify what's related to OCD. But at a baseline or at a knowledge, kind of from a knowledge perspective, I'm thinking so typically people who are experiencing delusions actually and genuinely believe and can be disconnected from reality in the way that they believe that these things are true. And they sort of adapt them as part of their understanding of reality. Whereas most of the time, people with OCD experience it as not logical. So they sort of logically know that these things are most likely not true. But still feel that sense of sort of compulsive need to be able to control for whatever the circumstance is. I don't know, Maya, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that you started off by saying this may be kind of a stuck place already just by getting into this question. But I'm in agreement. I think that there is in OCD some level of awareness and being able to step back and say like you were saying, like, I don't actually thoroughly believe that this is logical, yet I can't get over this thought. That's what we see in OCD a lot of the times, whereas in delusions, people who are struggling with that usually don't have that same level of awareness.
Right.
But as Ali was saying, very important to, not necessarily get stuck on this question, and to have the question, have the thought, and be able to sit with that uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely. And also recognizing that, like, you're not a therapist, we're not therapists, none of us are required to know for certain, like, what, the kind of experiences that we're having. But if we can sort of get accustomed to allowing ourselves to, like, tolerate the fact that we may not know exactly which experience falls under which diagnosis, or which experience falls under which kind of symptom cluster, I think that can be really helpful in being able to address it all in the same way, which can feel insensitive because it's like a one size fits all approach, but it can also feel really hopeful and like approachable when you recognize that, like, the content of whatever it is that your fears are, whatever it is that your OCD is, like, kind of the flavor of the week, doesn't matter as much as it would have you believe. And I think that can be something important to remember too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely I've heard that kind of mentality coming up a lot. And I think definitely content can be irrelevant when it comes to treatment, because we do treat these things all the same regardless of what the flavor of your OCD is. However, acknowledging for those who struggle with things like pure O type obsessions, where they're sexual obsessions, harm obsessions, POCD, those things can be really distressing because of the content. And so having some self-compassion there, and understanding that in that situation, barriers can show up because of the inherent shame that comes with those obsessions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad you mentioned that too, because that's an important fact that I think can sometimes be forgotten. It doesn't make the experience of, like, sexual intrusive thoughts any more difficult than other subtypes. But the reality is that there is this additional stigma. There's these extra layers of sort of stigma that we have to get through to even be able to access the content to be able to treat it. And so I really like that you said that, because I think that's a really important reminder.
All right, let's move on to another question. All right, so this one says, why, when I notice that I'm not anxious or not having intrusive thoughts about my intrusive thoughts and anxiousness start again? I got to reread this again really quick to fully understand.
Yeah.
Ali, do you have thoughts off the bat?
Yeah. Well, I think what this question is asking is sort of like the, like, obsessing about obsessing, or even more relevant, being anxious about not being anxious. So in a way, like, our anxiety, our response, our disgust faces, our kind of distress, those things can actually all serve as reassurance. So anytime that we're really fixating on that behavior, we can be kind of focusing on that and not on the fact that we're having those thoughts and that we can identify with those thoughts potentially. So I almost think of it as like a classic, like, harm OCD. So if you're really fearful of, like, running over a person when you're driving, and you sort of, like, are noticing for whatever reason today you're not experiencing a lot of anxiety about that, then you may sort of get a flood of anxiety, or like a delayed sort of peak of anxiety from this idea of not being anxious, and, like, what that might mean about you that you're not anxious, and how that how you can sort of interpret your character and things like that. Is that how you understood it too, Maia?
Yeah, and I guess slightly differently as well. Like, something that comes up for me is the idea that what we give attention to, like, stays in our mind. So if we're noticing that we're not anxious and not having these specific intrusive thoughts, those intrusive thoughts inherently come back into your mind, and can then bring that anxiety as well, because they're showing up again. So yeah, it's definitely a tricky spot to be in, where you're like, oh, this is really interesting and both cool and oddly distressing that I'm not having these intrusive thoughts again. But in having that thought, they kind of naturally come back in. So in that way, it makes sense to me that some anxiety would be showing up again and that more attention is given to the intrusive thoughts. Hence, they come back a little bit more. And it's the same kind of mentality of, the more that we engage with our intrusive thoughts, the stronger they come back, the stronger the obsessions become. So that's what comes up for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, I can definitely relate because I've definitely like been in experiences where I'm like, oh, wow, I could be really anxious right now, but I'm not. And then I'm like, wait. And then, I am super anxious. So I can definitely like relate to that, especially when we have these like ongoing fears or obsessions that we're really accustomed to experiencing. I think it's like our anxiety almost becomes the norm. And we're really accustomed to feeling that reaction in this situation, kind of barring all other factors. The dog is in the background, just like lurking. I love it.
Yeah.
And I think that for people with OCD, sometimes even when like it's a relief not to be feeling anxiety anymore, even that can be distressing because it's still a brand new experience and it's still a transition. Depending on how long you've struggled with OCD, it can really feel like a part of who you are. So that itself can be kind of distressing. So I definitely like want to validate, can fully relate to this experience. Honestly, I feel like that's just like your OCD's like last ditch way of being like, okay, you're not paying enough attention to me. Obviously, you're happy without me. I'm back. Pay attention to me in whatever way it possibly can.
Absolutely. Oh, OCD. It knows all the tricks.
Oh, classic.
All right, let's get to another question. This one's from Josh Miller. How can you tell if you have general anxiety disorder or OCD? Interesting question. And first of all, just to reiterate that Allie and I are not licensed clinicians. We have firsthand lived experience of OCD. So this is where our perspective comes from. And I really wish that I had someone here that actually is diagnosed with both, because I have a friend who is, and their input would be very interesting to have here. But what comes up for me is I think in the experience of OCD, there are oftentimes like not necessarily fewer, but more specific clusters of triggers and clusters of things that make you anxious, essentially. And the mind gets really stuck on those obsessions such that they become recurrent. And I don't personally struggle with general anxiety disorder, but my understanding to a slight degree is that those sort of anxiety triggers come up kind of day to day, and they can shift a lot. They can be just depending on what's going on currently at that point, can vary greatly in terms of what the triggers are. Dog is licking my makeup brushes right now. That's very hygienic. Yeah, Allie, what are your thoughts on that? That's kind of mine.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like that's immediately where my brain went. Cause again, like not a clinician, I really don't know all that much about generalized anxiety disorder. Although I think that like my family and I would have all had you believe that we have anxiety. And then it turns out that like I just actually have severe OCD. But based on like my super limited understanding, it sounds like generalized anxiety can truly apply to anything day to day and can really include this sense of ongoing worry. It can be very vague, just sort of this vague sense of worry. I think if you're getting to the place where you're talking about symptoms of like sense of impending doom, dread, fear of being fearful, then that's more of like a panic disorder, like space that you end up in. But they're like all kind of interrelated in their own ways. Again, I'm so annoying. But like I almost want to reiterate just what we kind of chatted about earlier, which is like, I don't know how much it matters because the approach for treatment is like largely the same. If what you're experiencing has been diagnosed as a clinician, by a clinician as OCD, then you're going to be probably most likely approaching it with ERP or exposure and response prevention therapy, which actually can be really helpful for people with generalized anxiety disorder as well. So I would just like fully recommend, if you are able to access, definitely like create, some type of relationship with a clinician, really get yourself connected to that one-on-one treatment, because I think they'll be able to help you identify, okay, this is where generalized anxiety disorder is coming up. This is where OCD is coming up. I might approach each of these kind of symptom clusters differently. And as Maia said, I've never spoken with anyone who like openly talked about this, but I would absolutely love to talk about sort of the co-occurrence of these two disorders and how that's experienced. I know Maia and I tend to talk a lot about the co-occurrence of eating disorders and OCD, and then it's a very common experience of major depressive disorder and OCD. But this one we really haven't chatted about too terribly much. So I would be very curious to hear from others as well. And we welcome all the feedback and being able to learn. Also, as a side note, we recognize like treatment is absolutely not accessible, unfortunately, for most people. That's a big part of Hardquark's mission. So at any point, we're happy to, if you're willing to kind of connect with us individually, we're happy to do whatever we can to help you get connected to some of those resources and find therapy that's going to be like affordable for you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And just kind of on the same topic, we had a comment in the chat that was related to this from someone who does have experience with both. I'm just going to bring it up here briefly. From Maggie, it says, I have both and agreed my OCD is way more specific than my general anxiety disorder, which can be triggered by almost anything.
Nice.
So that's a nice input from someone who does struggle with both.
Yeah, I'm glad that we were like sort of close to right about that. So yeah, that was great. Thank you so much, Maggie. That was helpful.
Right. Let's go to another question. I lost track of where exactly.
Here we go. We can pull it up.
Oh, sweet.
Next question we have is, I feel like I can't even get mad anymore because I have a horrible intrusive thoughts when I do get mad, and I know they're not my thoughts because it makes me anxious. Is this a part of harm OCD? So I almost like hear some reassurance like written into that statement of saying like, I know they're not my thoughts because it makes me anxious. But I also love that you're willing to sort of diffuse between your thoughts and yourself. I think that's huge. That can be a really important part of grounding yourself and preparing for like other types of interventions and things like that. Harm OCD, having thoughts about people and fearful that that they're going to get hurt. Because a lot of people who don't have OCD, when they're mad at someone, they may have thoughts of them getting hurt and not be distressed by that. They might kind of say like, oh, that's weird. I can't believe I imagined them like falling down the stairs. Like they're just like really pissing me off today. And then go on with their day and not really think too much more about it after that. But for those of us who have harm OCD, or in this case, I think maybe some magical thinking or even scrupulosity and things like that coming into play, then we may really fixate on that and be fearful about either A, something bad happening to them, or B, what that means about us as a person that we thought that about our loved one, even though we're angry and that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess like that distinction is important, and certainly like that's consistent with harm OCD for sure. And I kind of do think that's like a partially human experience. I don't know what you think, Maia.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it does make a lot of sense to me in the context of harm OCD that, thinking about what your triggers might be, you would want to then kind of avoid those. So the fear of being mad, which can then trigger those intrusive thoughts of, oh, I'm going to harm someone. That whole string of events makes a lot of sense to me in this kind of context. I'm not really sure what else to say on that one.
No, I mean, I think that's a really good point. And like you said, it's like, it can be either about like, what does that mean about who I am as a person, which can bring on guilt, distress, anxiety, that kind of thing. Or like you were getting at, Maia, like it can mean something more, or like it can be more around like, okay, what does that mean that I'm going to do? Like, how could I potentially cause harm? Like, what does that mean about what I'm capable of in the future? All of these things sort of do fit under that OCD umbrella. But really just wanting to like stress as many times as possible without being the most annoying that, we may not have the answer to like exactly what fits into OCD. And sometimes we can cling on to that diagnosis of OCD as reassurance, which I have certainly done, absolutely guilty of. And so I sort of want to put that disclaimer out there that like you may not always know exactly what's related to your OCD, and it may be a part of your symptom cluster, and you may have to just sort of like adjust for that uncertainty in a way.
Yeah. And something that comes to mind for me too is like, you know, maybe then a good exposure is sitting with being angry and maybe doing exposures that bring on the emotion of anger and being mad. Because then that's a perfect opportunity to sit with that and allow the intrusive thoughts to be there. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that idea. And also like leaning into those thoughts that you're having about like violence coming upon the people that you're angry at, even I think could be helpful to the point of like a comedic level. So that's something that like Maia and I do quite a bit. So it's something you can certainly do with like the support of your therapist and other treatment team is just sort of like be willing to really lean into and embrace that concept. Because really the more you avoid it or the more you resist it, the more important your brain is going to categorize it as. Just as Maia was saying, like the more that you kind of think about something, then the more time you're giving it, the more importance it's going to have in your brain.
Absolutely. Let's get to the next one. What do you see as the future for hard Quirk? Also, you're both rad. Thank you very much, Maggie.
Mainly the second part. Thank you. The first one, I'm like, oh, you're out here asking the hard questions.
Indeed.
It's so important. But like, wow, huge questions. I want Maia to start and then I'll pop in after.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, you know, we've been running hard Quirk for a year and a half now. And things have constantly been changing in terms of what projects we're working on, what we're working towards. And I think what's really interesting is lately we've gotten an influx of new volunteers and stuff. And something we're really passionate about is like not having this be the Ali and Maia show and allowing everyone to have their input in this as well and what they see as important and where hard Quirk best fits in, what isn't being addressed. So really, I mean, I kind of feel like my answer is a big question mark, but in the best way possible, in that we are completely open for the needs of the community and how we can bring our strengths that we really emphasize in hard Quirk of creativity and humor, and how can we move those forward in a way that is beneficial for everyone. But as things stand, we run support groups, as was mentioned earlier. We have an online forum as well on our website, which is www.hardquirk.com. That is a space where people can go in at any time and kind of write questions, just bring up conversation topics really, and just have a community discussion around different relevant topics to OCD, as well as a place to maybe get support and whatnot in the time between support groups, which we run every other week for each of our groups. That's a little confusing, but
yeah, absolutely. And by the way, if you want to figure out like what the rotation is on the support groups, you can always go to hardquirk.com/events or just go to our homepage, which is www.hardquirk.com. And then you can go to the events section and it kind of tells you. So this week, for example, it's going to be a supporters group. So on this Thursday, which is August the 26th, we're going to be facilitating a group specifically for like loved ones, spouses, parents, things like that of people who have OCD, because we recognize that OCD obviously impacts much more than just the person who has it. And then the following Thursday would be for those who have lived experience with OCD, and it kind of follows on that rotation. So if you ever need to like figure out where you are in the rotation or where you are in the process, you can always find that on our events page. I found that personally to be very grounding and helpful to like remind me where we're at in the rotation. So you can always find that information. And like Maia said, we have gotten like so excited because the support groups have recently also, I think, grown and become even more diverse, which has been amazing because Maia and I have this privilege of being able to like do these peer-led support groups where we're learning, we're recovering, we're getting to the opportunity to meet all of you and learn from you. So that's been like very rewarding for me actually as a part of hard Quirk. And also the fact that we get to provide that resource at absolutely no cost has been huge, because that's a really big value of hard work and has been sort of since we started, really providing that accessible treatment for people, regardless of your economic background, and being aware that OCD treatment can unfortunately be so exclusive sometimes. Not just economically, but economically certainly is, can be one of the big barriers there. So I think, in line with that, like, I know we want to do other things, with that as well. Like, I've loved the fundraisers that Hard Quirk has done. We've done some really, really cool fundraisers. Definitely stay tuned for October. That can be like a really big month for us, because we have OCD awareness. We have all of this like really different exciting events and things like that. And last year we did what we call the Spook Yourself Challenge. That was so much fun. Really cool way to get like everyone in the community involved. We had like other advocates and like famous OCD people and, supporters. It was just a really exciting thing. But anytime we're able to like either raise money or get the community involved in anything that's going to like support this community, like our holiday card campaign, where we like got holiday cards sent to those people who were actually on residential units during the holidays. Anything we can do that's like that, that's just fun. Like, we just, I just really, really enjoy that. I love getting excited about OCD awareness and getting all of you excited about OCD awareness. So I definitely think, Maggie, like, that's more of like what I want to put in Hard Quirk's future for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely loved all of the kind of just community building projects that we've done, whether it was growing our support groups, doing these Spook Yourself challenges, and other kind of social media campaigns that bring everyone together in a recovery-oriented way, and definitely bringing creativity in as well. We've had different like art-related campaigns previously, and that has been so much fun. And yeah, I would really love to do some more of that and just build this community, and create a space for those who are new to the diagnosis, who have been around for a while and are also advocates, just so everyone can kind of come together and have a space that feels both safe and kind of motivating and empowering in recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like, thinking about the future, like, we've talked about all of these different ideas. We are like wanting to be so constantly adaptive to this community, because that's the entire reason why Hard Quirk even exists, is to serve this community. So when we hear people saying like they need more of this, when we hear people saying that they really appreciate something, like, that's really where we're going to put more of our energy, because like that's where our priorities are. I know we've talked in the past about potentially in the future doing some like peer counseling or peer coaching services. We've talked about being able to be more of a liaison for people to find access to like therapists and clinicians in the area that are like private pay, but also like awesome programs like No CD, which is, kind of who we're working with right now. So we've kind of talked about a lot of these ideas, and those are a little bit further off, but still very exciting. Definitely something we want to continue doing. And we would be so thrilled to hear from each of you. Like, blow our website up, blow our social media up, and tell us what it is that you actually need, or what it is that you want, what sounds helpful to you. And we are so happy to implement that. That's kind of like our bread and butter and where we get really excited.
Absolutely. All right, let's get to some more questions. This one is from Ashcon. I hope I pronounced that correctly. How can OCD sufferers balance exposure to triggers with self-care? Feels exhausting to keep trying to trigger myself, but don't want to give in to avoidance compulsions either. Any thoughts? Yeah, lots of thoughts. This is definitely something that both Allie and I have struggled with. It is a very sticky place in working towards recovery to find the balance between these things, because you're absolutely right that it can be so exhausting to prioritize and constantly be doing exposure and response prevention. And like, it's also very true that we need to set aside time for self-care and to do things to allow us to have the energy and motivation to keep going in our ERP. How exactly can we balance that? Allie, what have you done? I feel like I definitely have some thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
No, I mean, I definitely okay, self-compassion is such a gigantic part of OCD recovery. And it's like, this question is such a wonderful question because it's like everyone has this question. ERP, or exposure and response prevention therapy, which is the gold standard treatment for OCD, is notoriously extremely challenging. It is notorious for evoking some of the most distressing, and quite literally the most distressing, emotions that people can experience. That's the whole point, right? Like, that's how OCD continues to function, is with the threat of all of that distress. So when you're kind of like facing that directly, of course, it's going to be extremely distressing, especially in the beginning. So being able to like weave in self-compassion is absolutely like vital. I don't think that any of us could do it without it. This is especially true when you start working with people like Maia and myself who struggle with perfectionism, because we can become very perfectionistic about treatment. We can become perfectionistic about recovery, about how we're experiencing emotions, things like that. And really the whole idea of OCD recovery is allowing yourself to experience emotions exactly as they come, without needing to control them, and being able to steal a term from dialectical behavior therapy, ride the wave of that emotion, and just essentially be able to like tolerate that distress. So it makes a lot of sense. I personally have decided to integrate this in the way that like I've reframed how I think of self-care, to include doing a lot of ERP. And that's actually quite true for me. Most of my self-care activities actually are ERPs. So this includes things like eating, taking medication, drinking water, using like things that are like comforting to me, like blankets, or watching television shows. All of these things are actually also ERPs for me. So sometimes it's a matter of like, which ERP I'm going to choose. And am I going to choose one that's going to be very like rewarding to me at the end, versus an ERP that's like top of the hierarchy, really, really challenging, and that reward isn't necessarily there. So I don't know, if that's going to necessarily be an approach for everyone, because not everyone's OCD is so like generalized to things, but that's definitely been my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really important thing to bring up, is like how much OCD can interfere with people's kind of self-care routines, or ADLs, activities of daily living, like brushing your teeth, showering, etc. So yeah, that is an interesting place where there's an overlap of things might be exposures, but they might also be important self-care activities for you.
And it's weird because I would like have these really intense fears about doing these specific self-care activities, like for example, taking Tylenol with a headache, or eating a snack, or whatever. And then it's like when I actually do the ERP, I actually get this like sense of comfort simply from knowing that in spite of my anxiety, I chose to take care of myself. I think there's actually a sense of control in that. Yeah. Which is, it's very like ironic and unexpected and counterintuitive, but that's been a really cool learning experience for me too. I'm curious if others have had that experience as well.
That reminds me of something that Jenna Overbach, who is a OCD clinician, she had a reel recently, or a TikTok, that was basically this kind of repeated phrase of like, I just did something really hard. And then like thinking about it for a second, like, I just did something really hard. And like being able to have that self-compassion for yourself and like realize and give credit to your wins. That's definitely something that I have personally found important for my self-care routine, is acknowledging when I've done the hard things, and made it through and moved on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And something we always or recently love to do is in our support groups, sharing our wins of the week or our successes. I feel like that's always a super rewarding aspect of the support groups for me, is to
I agree.
allow people to like speak up to like, yeah, I did this hard thing and I made it through. Yeah. I mean, another idea that, again, may not work for everyone, but being able to like schedule in not only ERP time, but also self-care time. So if you're someone who has self-care activities that don't actually overlap with ERP very much, being able to schedule in both of those creates that sort of inherent balance in your schedule of doing both. So that's just another idea.
I like that idea too.
And I want to go to this question because I noticed that we've been talking about our own symptoms a lot. So what themes do you and Maia suffer from, and has it, I'm assuming, gotten better for you too?
What symptoms do we not? Between the two of us? Like, honestly, what symptoms do we not struggle with? I mean, I struggled. I'm thinking, so I mean, this is of course still true, but especially at the height of my OCD, I struggled. Like, top 5 subtypes would be magical thinking, contamination, health anxiety, scrupulosity, and did I say contamination?
I think you said emotional contamination, or maybe
okay, just regular, just all the different types of
all the contamination,
both emotional and physical. Certainly existential, and at time, could be anything at any given moment. But those are really my top 5, with like a special focus on health anxiety and magical thinking. So really a lot of fixation on being in control of myself, of my body, of my experience, of feeling like I can sort of stay in control at any given moment. So a lot of how that shows up is core obsessions around like somatic issues coming up, like any of my body not functioning the way that I want it to or am used to it functioning, or being really fearful of something that might alter my ability to take care of myself, like being drugged, being in like a different state of mind, any types of mental illnesses that may impact my ability to care for myself, like something that involves psychosis, things like that, have been like the largest ways that my OCD has really shown up. And that's probably still true. I think although my OCD has done some shape shifting, that's been mostly true throughout the course of the past 3 years now, which is wild that I got diagnosed in, well, I guess 2019. So, well, 2 years. How about you, Maia?
Well, first of all, has it gotten better for you?
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Yeah. Yes, it has. And I don't say that because I have like less intrusive thoughts, although I think I probably do. I say that only because like I was absolutely and completely non-functional. I'm noticing there's another comment in the chat box, which we'll certainly get to, but like Casey, my OCD really impacted in a big way my ability to eat, which caused a lot of uncontrollable weight loss and became actually really dangerous and ironically made me sort of be out of control when I was engaging in that ritual. So because I, am completely functional now, I feel that it's a complete difference. It's the difference between being in recovery and not being in recovery, between being myself and not being myself. Not many things are like all or nothing like that, but this feels like one of those things that kind of is. Because before I was diagnosed and received treatment for my OCD, received appropriate treatment for my OCD, I was ritualizing over probably 12 hours a day. So being to a place now where I'm fully functional, doing all the things that I want to be doing, working, going to school, enjoying, doing hard work with Maia and using my experiences to hopefully help other people, that's like, recovery city. So yeah, I do think that it's gotten better.
Yes. For me, I'd say that, again, OCD shapeshifted all over the place during time. But the most significant kind of themes for me have been sexual OCD or sexual intrusive thoughts. Health anxiety has also been a more frequent and a more recent one that comes up a lot. But perfectionism has definitely been very pervasive in my life. I still very much struggle with writing, which can make school very difficult. I remember trying to write an email in a therapy session, and it took me the entire 45, 50-minute session to write 2 sentences, and I didn't even finish the email. So lots of perfectionism there. I also struggle with body dysmorphia or body dysmorphic disorder, BDD. everything, honestly, everything just right.
Oh,
Yeah, but like I said, sexual OCD has been the probably most significant one, just because of that, like I was saying earlier, that layer of shame. I That was probably one of the first very distressing symptoms that I noticed, and that started when I was around 8 years old. So there was a lot of shame built up in the 12 years that I went without a diagnosis, and I didn't even start talking about my intrusive thoughts until like 10 years after they started. So that was a very difficult experience. But thankfully, my OCD across the board has definitely gotten better. Um, I I find actually, and it's very crazy to think that I don't really struggle with the sexual OCD as much. It's kind of shifted into like more of, now that I've done all these exposures and I'm comfortable, or not comfortable, but like more comfortable than I was before, of like approaching these ideas of um, sex life. Like, it's turned more into a kind of sexual orientation OCD situation where I'm like, I don't know what my sexual orientation is. I can't figure it out for the life of me. And like, I don't know if I'm asexual or if I am anything else under the sun. So that has definitely shifted, but the way that I used to experience it has gotten so much better. And like I said, across the board, I find that I don't I struggle less with intrusive thoughts. They show up less frequently. Although I wouldn't say that's like a hallmark of my OCD being better, kind of as Ali was saying. I think what's been the most improvement is how much less I've engaged in the rumination that I used to spend hours upon hours doing, as well as other rituals.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, because I was just like, that's the thing. Like, I'll think back to before I was diagnosed and had treatment and be like, oh, rough. I was engaging in some very intensive rituals. And I'm like, oh, no wonder my anxiety was only increasing, because I was just engaging the obsession all the time with no like ramifications, with no, ability. So I felt to like not do them or to sort of approach that fear. I was just like full blown, like, yep, absolutely OCD take over my life, because I didn't know that I really had any other option. I truly didn't. And I wasn't even aware that OCD was what I was struggling with. So this is where Maya and I usually like get on our soapbox about how challenging it can be to diagnose OCD, to get effective treatment, and how that can actually exacerbate, and absolutely does exacerbate, the experience of OCD and the severity of symptoms and things like that. So yeah, it has gone better though. I had a doctor who told me in treatment that the experience that medication can sometimes have with OCD, and I equate this with like recovery or things getting better, being that like maybe the frequency of the intrusive thoughts don't change, maybe the distress doesn't change, but what does change is like the volume. It almost feels like you're turning down the volume, and they become less and less like a blaring stereo at you, and less sort of important to your day-to-day like functioning. And I found that as a really important marker of like where I was at in recovery.
Absolutely. So some related kind of questions based on some things we talked about. Casey, thoughts on OCD causing eating disorders? I have health anxiety OCD, which makes me afraid to eat, but the not eating worsens my health. It's a hard cycle. Yeah, that's a hard cycle. I can definitely validate that. Ali, I know that this is something that you are very passionate about talking about. So,
I mean, we both are.
We both are.
But I truly do believe that I would not have an eating disorder if I had not had OCD first, because I did not struggle with any types of disordered eating that were clinically significant, more so than, the average woman in the US. Prior to having OCD. And when I started restricting my food, it was fully driven by OCD, by fears related to anxiety, and not driven by a desire to lose weight or even a desire to control my weight. And then as things do, that changed, and certainly evolved, and has at times become much more centric around my, like, changing my body weight, but also more centric around just being in control of how my body is, how it can be perceived by others, how I perceive it, how I take care of it, and things like that. And I think that's like a real hallmark of eating disorders. And I don't mean to say that eating disorders absolutely have to have the like body image component, but I do think that's a very common kind of trademark symptom throughout most eating disorders. So yeah, I've got big thoughts on that, because I really do think that they are even more interrelated than sometimes we're aware. I think that the treatment really needs to be more integrative in terms of being able to understand both at the same time and how to treat them both separately and together. I think that it's a very important factor of competency for care, for clinicians providing care for these things. I've even had a clinician, a dietitian once told me that certain people were kind of theorizing in the field that OCD eating disorders are just actually a subtype of OCD. And that really helped me understand like the extremity by which they're related. Like they are so deeply related. And I really want people to understand that, because I think that's really important.
Definitely. Yeah, I absolutely have seen so much overlap between them, both in other people that I know as well as in my personal experience. For me, I think I definitely had OCD before I was diagnosed with an eating disorder, but I wasn't diagnosed with OCD. So something that I've kind of like theorized for myself is that, having untreated OCD that was shifting themes, one of them being more along the lines of body dysmorphic disorder, like having that go untreated and just being so involved in those obsessions over time and becoming so distressed and anxious, like the eating disorder behaviors became sort of like a compulsion for me, or a way of relieving my anxiety about these things. Whether it was directly related to my body or not, those behaviors were definitely kind of a safety behavior for me. And yeah, I think there are definitely, regardless of what your OCD looks like, there can be so much overlap. Whether it's the body related stuff, body image, or if it's like fears of eating due to contamination stuff, health anxiety, like there's just so much overlap that I think it is very possible for a lot of people that OCD could be a causal factor, at least I know, in eating disorders, whether or not it's completely a cause or not. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap, and that I agree, Allie, like there needs to be a lot more conversation around that, and beyond just conversation, like development of treatment that integrates the both, because they can overlap so much. And I think that, I found personally that when I'm treating one and not the other, it just exacerbates the other.
Yes.
So yeah, like these are things that definitely need to be addressed at the same time, simultaneously. Yeah. That's the word I was looking for.
Absolutely.
Another one related to personal experiences we've had. What insight can you give into the groinal response in sexual orientation OCD, and what caused this to happen and how to deal with it? So what causes this to happen? So the groinal response, for those who might not kind of understand this aspect of OCD, people who struggle with sexual orientation OCD may have fears that they are attracted to a certain gender. And the groinal response, if you're experiencing some sort of groinal response, people with OCD can attach to that and get curious about the meaning, and can attach meaning to it of, if I'm experiencing this groinal response, this means this. If this means that I am attracted to X, Y, and Z. So that can be a place where people get stuck in the obsession of trying to figure out their sexual orientation OCD. It can be a compulsion to pay attention to those. So how to deal with it? I mean, my anticlimactic advice is to, when you're experiencing a groinal response, notice it and kind of in the framework of acceptance and commitment therapy, allow that to be and let it go and continue forward with the next thought that comes up. Again, anticlimactic and not necessarily the most rewarding advice, but as a practice, I've personally found that to be very helpful. Do you have any thoughts on this one, Allie?
I mean, I'm just like sitting here wondering, like, how many times a day do you think we say like tolerate, like the word tolerate?
Oh my God.
It's the worst, but it's also so accurate.
It is.
And that's especially true with like bodily sensations, like the groinal response, which I actually don't have like personal experience with, but like it's a very common thing. And I've talked with people about it a lot. But to me, it seems like it's okay, just another physical sensation that you sort of have to tolerate. It's much like health anxiety, right? Like you have physical sensations, and if you're hyper focusing on your body and you're hyper vigilant to like different body cues that are coming up, then of course you're going to struggle with that. Like, of course you're going to be really fixated on that. It's not actually like about the feeling in your groin. It's actually about your interpretation of your feeling in the groin. And I think that's a very important thing to remember, because everyone has feelings in their groin, but however you're perceiving that, or whatever meaning you're attaching to it, is actually what's being really disruptive for you in your life, kind of day-to-day functioning.
Definitely. Allie, do you want to pick the next question?
Yeah, there's so many questions.
I know. I'm like,
I'm sad.
All right, rapid fire. Let's do
just really quickly from my POV, the answer is yes, you can absolutely, and most often do have two subtypes going on at one time. I don't really know that many people who literally just have one subtype. That's kind of amazing. But yes, absolutely, you can experience them two at a time. I'm going to pick the next one, and we're going to just be like, it'll be like a lightning round. Okay.
Let's go.
Okay. Are there ways to stay motivated during treatment? I try to remind myself while I'm trying to get better, but it's getting difficult to stay on track. My first thought is just like Maia was saying earlier, with the acceptance and commitment therapy approach or ACT, values. Literally, like, what do you care about? What's important to you? What do you want your time to be spent doing? Because whatever it is, I promise you, OCD is not going to be down for it. And that's always really helpful for me to remember in those moments where I'm just tired and I'm just fatigued with treatment. What about you, Maia?
Yeah, I think a lot of people can talk about values being sort of that like end of the road kind of idea of like, what am I actually working towards? But values can actually be super helpful in the moment when you're making the choice of, if you have the ability and the time, the hesitation to make the choice of whether or not you're going to engage in a compulsion or not. Values can be super integral in that moment of, all right, am I going to engage in this ritual, or am I going to move forward in a different way, because actually by engaging in the compulsion, that's not in line with my values. So I've definitely used that both for myself and helping out friends. I find values to be a super great tool actually in the moment.
Yeah, I agree. Are you guys going to be at the OCD walk? Yes, we are going to be there. Please find our page. I don't think it's up yet, but it will be soon enough. And we are so hyped, so excited to meet all of you. Want your support, whether it's virtual or in person, obviously safely. We're so excited. So yes, we will be there. How can I assume, is it queer trans for QT or queer?
Not positive, but I believe queer trans.
Okay. Queer trans community being more understanding of sexual orientation OCD. I wish I had the answer. I would say education, like people just need to in general understand OCD more. And unfortunately, that's not the case right now. But you're absolutely right that a lot of times people who have sexual orientation OCD are perceived as homophobic, just as people who have P or pedophilia OCD are perceived as pedophiles. And that can be really triggering and actually traumatic at times. Doesn't make it true, right? If anything, it's actually kind of the opposite of true. And I usually like to use the example of the fact that like I'm bisexual, I'm engaged to a woman, and I myself obsess over my sexuality. I'm like, what if I'm straight? What if I'm actually straight? What if I'm not gay enough? so on and so forth. So it really doesn't attach at all to homosexuality in particular. It just attaches to that stigma of not being the sexual orientation that you think that you are or that you identify as. So I usually like to use that example. You can use me as an example if you want to.
Nice.
Next, Maya, do you have anything or no?
I don't really have anything. You covered all my thoughts, actually. So that's great.
Casey, is it normal to feel bad about your subtype? I've switched obsessions several times, and some make me feel way more hopeless and guilty than others, or like it's impossible to recover.
Yes, I definitely relate to this. Definitely with kind of the more taboo obsessions. Don't know what just happened there. But I mean, for me, struggling with sexual obsessions, those have definitely made me feel bad about myself and about having that subtype when I did have the awareness that I had OCD. Yeah, there can be that, like I said earlier, that layer of shame can definitely add to a lot of further like shame about shame. About having that obsession. And
like shaming yourself for being seriously. There's like all these layers of shame.
It's distressing as hell. What about you, Allie?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually like haven't really had that experience just because, well, okay, that's not true. I actually do think that there's like an additional stigma to magical thinking. And I think that's even true like within the OCD community. Like people will be like, I've actually heard people say like, well, that's stupid. I know that's not going to happen. That's not going to scare me. But like my fear is real fear. And as a person who's like really struggled with magical thinking, but also I like to think of myself as educated and smart and these things, that was like a really big stigma piece for me, was kind of overcoming like, how can I be, this like established person and still like allow these potential things that I know are superstitious or that I know are magical thinking to like interfere with my day-to-day functioning as much as I do. So I guess I can relate in that way, but I do really feel like the sexual intrusive thoughts are like stigma city. And that's come up time and time again. Literally anytime I meet people who are struggling with like that subtype in particular, or pedophilia OCD or incestual kind of intrusive thoughts, things like that, oh man, that really tends to bring about the shame even within the community. So what we can sort of do as Quirk is try our best to establish a community that's safe, that's open. Part of how that is that Maya and I really speak very like openly about these things. In a joking way, but also in a serious way. And like in our so many pieces, we're just like lay it out, like give the details, like you're writing a script, which is like one of the different exposure and response prevention ideas you can do. Like we're just like, just say it. Like we're so desensitized at this point. So I think that's actually been really helpful too.
Absolutely. All right.
Oh, you have one?
No, I was just going to try to get at least one or two more.
Yeah. So we've got from Anonymous 100, can teenagers with severe OCD ever get off meds? And then their second kind of, I think like a follow-up is sort of talking about going through this with their teenager. Teenagers it's tough because, they can be really young and it can be really challenging for them to get motivated. And autonomy and like social identity is really important at that age. So it can be really hard to figure out like where you pull back and allow them to sort of make their own choices, right? And I hear you struggling with that in this sentence. I don't have an immediate answer for you. I will say that we do host the like supporters support groups. And actually we have one specifically for supporters of loved ones with OCD on Thursday, the 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'll be happy to have you, and you will be kind of surrounded by other parents and spouses and loved ones who have had to navigate the exact same issues of how to get their loved one motivated. So we're happy to have you if you decide to come there. What is your perspective / lived experience on substance use interacting with OCD? That's a great question because it's very common, but not something I've personally experienced since my fears like of substance use. That's like one of my like core obsessions. So it kind of, in a way, was like weirdly adaptive, saved me from accidentally utilizing that as like a coping skill, but it certainly is very common. What are your thoughts, Maya?
I mean, I think there are various ways that this kind of interaction can come up. One of them that I've experienced is like With alcohol use, I tend to get an uprise in my obsessions because I have that added fear of what if something happened that I just don't remember because I was under the influence. So that can be a very difficult obsession as a result, and definitely can steer me away from drinking more than a glass of wine or something like that. And in terms of other substances, I'm not really positive, but I mean, I've definitely heard of various substances kind of create an uptick in OCD symptoms, which, you know, makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think if someone is under the influence of any substance, really, like that's an altered kind of state. And so when you have less control over your awareness and what's going on, obsessions can naturally kind of take over and take more space in your mind. So that's my input there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it makes total sense to me from an empathic perspective. Like, it makes total sense to me that people would end up utilizing those things to cope, because this disorder is unbelievably challenging. Just obviously so much suffering and things like that. So it makes a lot of sense. It's just not something that like I have a ton of personal experience of. And I think probably we would love to learn more about. Mm-hmm. Totally open to that. So we've got Avi Morgan. Abby, please, let us know if that's mispronounced. Hey guys, can you please help me? I have pure O, and I always have the fear of touching somebody inappropriately. And then kind of some other messages regarding around that. Yes, that's really challenging. I'm tossing it right over to Maia. That's like your thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can validate the shit out of this, honestly. Like, this is an extremely distressing subtype and obsession to be dealing with, especially when you're constantly surrounded by people. And if you're someone like me who enjoys people's company a lot, that can really create an interference. So, I mean, I'm seeing some added things of just being fearful and nervous around people. The perception that people are afraid of you because you're like showing up as nervous. And I don't necessarily know if I have a lot of clear advice, but I would love to just validate this experience and that I've been there as well. It's very distressing, especially when it's interfering with your values of being with loved ones and whatnot. I mean, I would definitely, not an easy task whatsoever, but practicing that concept of being able to sit with the thoughts and, you know, I mean, being aware of any sort of small behaviors that are going on. For me, if I'm feeling really tense and I'm like holding, like my hands are in fists and whatnot, noticing that, having the awareness around those sorts of cues and releasing that. Those are some tactile kind of skills to, you know, stay present while also inherently like reducing that sort of appearance of anxiety when you're able to notice those cues and kind of release that tension. That can help to kind of reduce that tenseness that other people might be picking up on. And yeah, I'm not sure what else to say. It's definitely a difficult experience, and I can validate that 100%.
Yeah, it sucks. I mean, I think that's like, I'm glad that you said that, because it's like, you're not alone.
You're not alone, not whatsoever. Yeah.
Yeah, I can kind of read the desperation there and can relate. That's something I think that a lot of people who have OCD go through. Like, you're not alone in that experience, and may not have all the answers right here, right now, but what we can absolutely say is that, like, you're in a safe community here talking with us. We're happy to help you, you know, navigate what hopefully like your therapist can help you as well. So yeah, you're not alone in that. Is there any way to tell a difference between PTSD and intrusive thoughts? I mean, I feel like this is like another diagnosis question. And like for the 5th millionth time, like, we're not therapists, right? But There's certainly a relationship between trauma and OCD. We know that for certain. Like that's been researched a lot, clinically speaking. I don't know about identifying the difference of the symptoms that might come up with PTSD and intrusive thoughts, because I think that sometimes they probably can present similarly, just based on like the disturbing nature and content and the physical kind of like how your body like immediately responds whenever you are experiencing those thoughts and, you know, disturbing content and things like that. I don't know. What do you think, Maia?
Yeah, I mean, I think intrusive thoughts can be a symptom of PTSD. Kind of if we're thinking about PTSD triggers and if there are intrusive thoughts related to sounds or other stimuli. Yeah, I definitely think intrusive thoughts can be a symptom of PTSD. Yeah, I'm not sure about telling the difference between PTSD and OCD specifically, but in this kind of instance, I actually don't know if I want to say that because I'm not actually qualified to. But my thought was like, I mean, my assumption, and this could be totally inaccurate, is that we might actually approach the experience of intrusive thoughts in OCD and PTSD in a similar way. Again, I'm not positive, but
yeah,
those are all my thoughts because I'm not positive.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's all very helpful. Thank you. We have, can you discuss thought action fusion? I like it. And how thoughts and images feel so real, like in the past. I am not sure. I'm not sure if we're talking about false memory OCD, where you're kind of convinced that something actually did happen, that you did do something specific or have a specific experience. But thought action fusion is obviously like a very important and popular concept within OCD, and just kind of understanding that it can mean kind of like one of two things, actually. There's like kind of two versions of thought action fusion. One being that this moral conflation, this idea that because you had the thought, it's just as bad as actually doing the act. So if you have a thought about murdering someone, it's like you're just as bad of a person as actually murdering someone. And then the other piece of it is that because you are thinking about it more, or because the thought is there, it's more likely to occur or more relevant to you somehow. So that's like almost like these two different versions of thought action fusion. I don't know how those would play into like things that might feel real in the past. Do you have any thoughts on that, Maia?
Not really. I mean, I guess for me, my concept of thought action fusion is typically kind of future oriented, where, because I'm having this thought, it means that I'm more likely to do this. But I suppose that could also be related to false memories, in that if you're experiencing thought action fusion of like, because I'm having this thought, it's more likely that maybe something happened in the past and I don't remember. I suppose that could be a symptom for sure.
That's kind of what I was thinking too. Like, the more that you have the thought of the memory, or the more that you have the thought, the more likely you are to have actually done it, or for it to be real, the more real that it feels for you. That's definitely, I think, like in some ways tied to thought action fusion. I would love to discuss that more. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we really don't. We're like way over time. So we're very happy for all of you that have kind of stayed to let us finish answering these questions. I think we just have like literally one more. So we'll answer this one and then we'll kind of wrap up from there. Okay. We've got, do you know of any support groups specifically for emetophobia and OCD? Short answer, no, I don't. But I think most support groups for OCD will be like a great space to chat a little bit about emetophobia, because that is such a common part of OCD and it's a very common symptom that comes up. So I think most places, like if you end up in our support group, we certainly have people with emetophobia in our support group, and other support groups and things like that. We'll probably be able to kind of cope with that. Oh, I totally missed a question. I'm sorry. We'll do this one. and then cut it off. Do you think that people 100 years ago had OCD in such a big numbers as nowadays? Maybe something changed in our diet that influences our minds, or maybe they just weren't diagnosed.
My assumption is they just weren't diagnosed.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're thinking about OCD, it's like, you know, these sorts of fears that people get obsessed around, like these fears might have shown up kind of from an evolutionary perspective. Like they might have been useful to have these concerns, and hence OCD developed in that way. And then just, yeah, people didn't so much know how to treat it, or they weren't diagnosed. So then these kind of thought patterns perpetuated. That's my best theory. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know definitely like there are so many stories of people who were struggling with things like scrupulosity, like so long ago, literally like so far back in history, you know, especially people who were part of like important like church organizations or things like that. And back whenever religious kind of practices were so core, you know, culture for people's like day-to-day experiences. Oh man, scrupulosity was like popping off the charts. But it just wasn't really identified as scrupulosity. It was kind of identified as lots of other behaviors and things like that. And I think, unfortunately, like it just really wasn't diagnosed. I definitely don't think that there's anything in our diet that necessarily would cause the uptick of OCD. But there are theories for that. And I think even that itself, as there are theories for literally everything. Yes, Maggie, the old Catholic Church. Yes, absolutely. Could be big time OCD and Scroop foundations. But yeah, I definitely do think that we are getting more and more like open to and able to diagnose OCD and effectively treat it, which has actually been really helpful in us identifying the numbers. Also, I don't know if they even were like counting back then. Like, did they even keep the numbers of people who struggled with this? You know, like there's just so many different factors over history of how people may or may not have been diagnosed with OCD.
Mm-hmm. That was an interesting one to end on.
I know. That was kind of fun. I like that. I would love to learn more about like the history of OCD diagnoses and things like that.
I am reading a book right now that talks a lot about kind of early on experiences of OCD. So that's been interesting.
That is very interesting.
Yes.
I also really liked that lightning round situation.
Yeah,
that was kind of fun. That was also like just good for keeping us on track.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're definitely way over, but
talk about this all day. Well, like, you know, relatively on track. We could have been here for like another hour or not.
Yeah.
So that's impressive.
We definitely talk a lot. Questions in long ways. So
absolutely. And also we just love it. Like we genuinely like love hearing from all of you, answering your questions, getting your feedback. Like it's so enjoyable. So thank you as usual for coming out. We are going to do our last takeover, I think, next Monday. And that's going to be Monday, August 30th at the same time. So that'll be like our farewell takeover for the No CD webinars. Feel free to kind of pop back in, bring questions, bring comments. We're so here for it. I don't know, Maya, is there anything you wanted to share before we head out?
I would just reiterate that we have our support groups going. Sounds like there are plenty of people out there who could use at least the validation from other people who are experiencing OCD in similar ways. So that is a great place to both get some support and be in a community of other people who are struggling with similar things. So as we've said multiple times now, our support group for those for loved ones and supporters is going to be this week, August 26th at 8 p.m. EST. And then the following week is going to be our support group for firsthand experiencers. So we'd love to see you all there. You can head to hardquark.com/events, and that will show you the information that you need in order to get access information for the support groups. So
and in the meantime, find us on social media, find us on our website, post in the forum, email us. We love hearing from you. So hopefully we hear from you for next Monday. Thank you all so much.
Have a good night.